The most basic definition of civil war is a war that is occurring between two or more belligerents who, at the beginning of the conflict, were under the same sovereign authority.
Yeah.
So if you just simply take that for what it's worth, or as a definition, one can cover quite a lot of things. I think the more pertinent aspect of your question, though, was who is this going to
Mm.
be? Initially, and already and basically at this stage, I think we're talking about essentially um, uh, relatively small factions within distinctive communities, identity groups,
Mm.
specifically breaking along ethnic lines, as I spoke of, and indeed as David Cameron was talking about when he
Mm.
talked about ghettoized communities living in their silos and so on. So initially, and I think probably already now, what we're talking about are small fractions within those groups that are highly radicalized, that are intent on violence. The distinction, the main split here now is we already have a fairly active anti-status quo violent movement within the Muslim community in
Mm.
Britain. That's why we've got 50,000 people on the terror watch list, or
Mm.
roughly thereabouts. Let's say somewhere between 40 and 50,000 on the terror watch list. We've got a fairly regular occurrence of terror attacks. So within one of these factions, we already have a perfectly obvious, readily identifiable violent extremist faction that is attempting in various ways to increase the tensions within society, to
Mm.
take greater and greater control over its conscience community, um, and create a greater split. The government has said a bunch of times that they're terribly concerned about the counter phenomenon, the phenomenon which you might say is in natural counterposition with
Yes.
that, which is the nativist or the extreme right, or however they tend to characterize this. This is essentially, and by this, all they really mean is they're concerned with the emergence of a white identity movement that
Mm.
essentially adopts fully the same patterns of behavior, the same insistence that essentially a multicultural
Yes, it
life is
does.
impossible for the country, and begins therefore to conduct attacks. These now we haven't really seen any of these that are terribly significant. There have been a handful, but relatively speaking, these are rudimentary. But the government is concerned that the seed is there, the potential is there, and I think they're perfectly right to
Mm.
be concerned um, about exactly those things. Um,
Yes.
the major concern really is that whereas Islamic extremism or Islamism, that combination of um, Islam and fundamentalism and our political fundamentalism is ultimately an extremist movement within a minority community, whereas the emerging anti-status quo ideas, identity movements within the white community have the potential for mass mobilization on account of the fact that the white population is still um, the majority population of the country. Uh, you need a mass population to support a mass movement.
Mm.
So that combination of factors, and particularly the potential for radicalization effectively of the majority community, is extremely worrisome from a societal cohesion, from a
Mm.
from the perspective of someone who might be worried about the outbreak of substantial violent domestic political turmoil.
In your writing, I mean, and I've watched some of the other things you've done, you very clearly set out the kind of various stages. I know that you have indeed said that there are different kind of theories about starting of a civil war, but the one that you came down on, or rather the one that you used, was actually Chairman Mao's, was it not? And I wonder whether you could go through those stages with us. They're quite simple 3 stages, aren't there? And at what stage do you think we might be at the moment, if any?
I used the Chairman Mao's model because it is the most common model of insurgency. So if you're in a class, a university class on insurgency, or you're studying it in a military staff college or something like that, you'll hear you hear reference to something called classical insurgency. Essentially, what they're referring to is the Maoist model, and it's very simple. It has 3 phases. The first phase is usually described as the defensive phase, or phase 1 is the defensive phase, and it's defensive from the perspective of the insurgent actor. During this phase 1, what the insurgent is doing is primarily political organization, proselytization, propaganda activities. It is getting its house in order. It is building its conscience community, which is just an academic word for people who listen to it, or the people whom it is trying to energize, to mobilize. So it's building up a structure. It's working out its narratives. It's doing all these sorts of things. In phase 1, the insurgent is usually not very physically active. There might be a handful of pinprick attacks here and there, in order to obtain weapons or materials or something like that. Oftentimes there is an alignment in the early stage, in the very earliest stage, between criminal groups and the insurgent group, because criminals tend to have access to muscle in ways that the political insurgents usually don't in the beginning. Phase 2 is this can last a long time. It may last 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. Then phase 2 is usually referred to as the stalemate, and that's when attacks have begun to occur, but the insurgent forces are not superior to the government security forces. They don't have more muscle, but they have the potential to create no-go areas. They have stable base areas. They're beginning to build up a military structure. They've got, it might be a rudimentary military structure, but they've got a fair number of tough guys who are reliable, reasonably well armed, can conduct operations. And again, this might last a long time, but it's when you start to see ambushes on police stations, for example, or attacks on government figures, judges, lawyers, media figures. That mix of, it becomes more physically active.
Yeah.
And the third phase is the usually called the offensive, and that's when the insurgent has built up sufficient material strength while the counterinsurgent or the government has weakened to the extent that the insurgent can contemplate actual peer-on-peer combat with the security forces. So that's the classic Maoist model, right. And more or less tracks what happened in the Chinese Civil War and some other cases of insurgency, which we might give example of. I think that Britain has very likely no chance whatsoever of going to a phase 3 sort of civil war, largely because we don't have the kind of fractures that I'm talking about don't have a defined political geographic entity to attach themselves to. You're not going to have Northumbria versus the North versus the South. It isn't going to split that way. It's much more complex.
As you said, city, sort of country versus city, almost.
So I think the main thing is going to be urban versus rural, and specifically, I think London is the most endangered. If you look at just at the way power, actual literal power, not abstract political power flows. Actual power in Britain flows from the north to the south.
Yeah.
So our major power lines, our gas lines, compression stations, all of that associated infrastructure is essentially located in rural and peri-urban areas, and feeds that giant metropolis in the south, which is rather unstable at the best of times.
Yes.
So you can imagine what London might be like if you switch the power off.
Yes. Yeah.
For a week or so, or a week or a couple of weeks, and you do that five or six times in a winter. Switch off the electricity, the gas, you disrupt the transportation system. It will rapidly most estimations will just rapidly tear itself apart, or at least that's the assumption, and is my working assumption when I think about red teaming the strategy of an insurgent group. But you asked where we are with respect to this. The answer is, I think that as far as the Islamist factions are concerned, they're somewhere at the beginning of phase 2. And we know this because there are plenty of no-go areas in Britain. There are parts of British cities where there is negotiated policing. The police either don't go there, or they go there. When they go there, they go with they prepare by consulting with local leaders and the like. They're clearly already in a phase of conducting regular attacks, and clearly there is a large enough contingent of possible attackers to sustain a pretty gigantic internal security network, covering, as I said, somewhere between 40 or 50,000 people at any given time. As far as the other side, the white identity groups, I think we're somewhere in the middle of phase 1, probably.
Mm-hmm. In terms of Britain, to be sentimental for a minute, British always tended to pride themselves, rightly or wrongly, on this sense of lack of political violence, in the country, and on being, just a country that has evolved. In some ways, it's not true. Obviously, we did have a civil war, back in the 1640s. But you are from America originally, are you not, David?
No, I'm Canadian originally. Yes.
Oh, Canadian. As a Canadian, when you look at Britain, are you surprised that you could possibly be able to apply this to this country? Does it surprise you?
Yes. Yeah, it does very much. It doesn't. I moved to Britain in 1998.
Right.
And I feel it's been I feel very much at home here, but I feel it's a country that has changed enormously in that period.